He's been this blue since we got here, don't bother. The High Sir said we are supposed to call if there is a hint of the young man being sick. You are worrying too much, even if he looks alive enough to last for a while. Dew's eyes slightly opened. He saw nothing but a rough square stone before him in the dull light of torches burning somewhere. His wrists were sore, his breathing heavy, but at least he was sober enough to grasp his situation. He was tied up by his hands, which were held above him. His legs were tied together as well. How long he had sat on them was unclear, but they had gone numb. 2 sets of iron shoes were placed a meter apart somewhere before him. After them came bars. He knew the stench. It wasn't the rotten one of the torture chambers, but that of another place he had spent time in far too long, and the 2 guards before him were painfully familiar as well. How long did he say he was going to take? The spoiled voice of the one who he had talked to during his time waiting to be executed sounded from his left. Metal clattered as the other one, who had been smacked unconsciously by Avery, shrugged. If everything goes well, not that long. If she refuses, I guess we'll hear from the guard. Another finger? He said hand, idiot. Dew unconsciously clenched his fists, but the stinging of raw flesh touching skin developed into a burning too quick to continue. Why the fuck did you do that? He spat through a thick layer of saliva in his numb mouth. The guard to his left jumped up and stumbled towards Dew. Before him the man knelt down. He stuttered. I think you are a hostage. Or a prisoner, I don't know. You can't just cut off my finger, steal my ring, and answer with the no, the one tied up complained, trying to get to his aching knees, but being too weak to do so. Well, the scenario is, the guard began before being interrupted by the harsh, annoyed voice of the other. Don't bother, it's not like he has to know. You're just salty because nobody ever cared about you enough to go over their limits for you. Anyway, there's someone you know who doesn't want to cooperate, so Sir Puff commanded for your finger to be cut off as a object of leverage. Sorry for that, I hope it heals well. Dew blankly stared at the man. Someone he knew. It could be many people, but why take his ring finger out of all the body parts he had? Could it be that? No, it was probably just to have him be more identifiable. Few people in the castle had light skin with a couple of blue spots on his slim stature, but even fewer wore a ring with a cat engraving on the inside. Who is it? He demanded to know, even though he wasn't in the position of receiving an honest reply. The nice guard's lip twisted into a pained line. Your friend that saved you from the gibbet less than a year ago. Dew nearly fainted. How? 2 people reported him dead. Jonah had been the person who must have beaten him at least unconscious, and he must have wanted to finish his job. Everyone else had arrived almost 3 days ago already. It didn't make sense. Dew's voice trembled as he asked, How is she doing? Shouldn't you know? The one in the back replied nervously. I was told she died. Well, yes, but apparently your beast can walk without a breath and heartbeat. Dew had stood up on his knees to shout at the man, sank back, the chains digging into his flesh. And what are they going to do to her? He whispered. What do they want from Avery? He hated the way he began to tear up, how his airways tightened and his voice threatened to vanish. If the king's advisor was involved, it could be anything. And he knew the hybrid would do anything at this point just because one meager merling was chained up to control him. The guard gasped. He was on the edge. Who knows? Maybe it's because that slut isn't supposed to be moving after all those things that happened on the battlefield. Maybe she made a pact with the devil or something to grant her immortality, but who am I to judge what can or cannot be achieved by someone like her? Yeah, well, you'll probably stay in one piece if you already managed to have your death sentence revoked, the guard closest to Dew commented, attempting to comfort him. The noise of a third person approaching echoed through the prison complex, and shortly after a third man in uniform stood before him, but on the other side of the bars. Is it done? Can we leave? The nervous guy immediately jumped at the newcomer to ask. The bearded man behind the bar shook his head, his face pale and disturbed. He replied, She gave in quickly. We'll just have to wait. I'll talk to the general already. He will take care of everything after Tom informs him that Sir Puff is done. Then he said we will lock him in the same room. The man only looked at Dew for a short moment before leaning against the wall and rubbing his temples. What takes him so long? The questioning and the whole explaining part should be done already. Yeah, it is done, but I'm sure the general will hold Sir Puff accountable if he gets to know. Like, the argument of being a traitor to the crown, I understand the countermeasurements, but everything else wouldn't even be legal if neither of them were declared dead by law, the newcomer professed shortly, after which he added with desperation in his voice, I'm sorry, I know some of you don't think about it the same way, but I have a daughter and a wife, so it disgusts me. The nervous soldier laughed dryly and proclaimed, Shouldn't she be used to it by now? She's a woman in the army, how do you think she got in? He was stopped from speaking further. With slight satisfaction, Dew watched as the face of the soldier turned red, while the hand of the father had his neck in the hard grip of his hand. But it wasn't enough. There wasn't enough pain caused inside the man's body because he was let go and sank to the ground, conscious enough to choke and rub his bruised neck with his gauntlet. He should have died. Dew craved it. The chained-up man demanded the strength of the father and the freedom of the other guard, so he could finish the one cowering on the ground. And the slug, he wanted to see the slug's organ burst out under the pressure of his foot, covering the floor with a mess of slimy blood and body, which deserved nothing more than to be torn apart by dogs. And Dew's arms bled as he leaned into his restraints, drooling over the idea of murder. The door in the bars was opened as a fourth knight came inside, telling the others to lead the prisoner out of the cell. Dew's hands were free only for a moment before the bearded man and the one he had talked to during his first time in prison took one arm each to guide him where they wanted him to go. He stayed silent. It wasn't because he had nothing to say or because he feared what might happen if he spoke a wrong word. His own safety was a secondary need. He was thinking. The slug was waiting outside the prison complex in the corridor of the first level. He wore his usual poised smile on his disgusting lips. The rings were shimmering on his gross fingers. Those of one hand played with small and shiny objects. You couldn't turn away in attention. Those were his. Those were his and his partner's rings, and he held both of them in one hand while having torn apart those who they belonged to. The hands of his guards tightened their hold on his arm as he automatically showed the slightest sign of struggle. The advisor was walking before all of them, his free hand behind his back and his posture as straight as his figure allowed it to. Dew turned away, his head to roughly face the direction where the nice guard was standing. You said last time you were going to get married in summer, is that right? He squeezed through his teeth, forcing a soft smile on his lips. Yes, I didn't think you'd remember, the man replied with a tone of surprise, mistrust, and delight all at once. How was it? The prisoner eyed the man's armor. Well, it was lovely. We caught one of the days where the sun was shining nicely. The cleric wedded us in the tiny cathedral and the royal garden. We didn't have many guests, just our close family and friends, but they were all very happy to be there. Now we're living together. What did she think about the war? Was she worried? Dew's gaze was caught by a slender sword hanging from the man's belt above the breastplate. Oh, she was worried, but then I told her I didn't have to go because I was tasked with securing the castle. That relieved her a ton. I believe that, Dew replied, feeling earnestly happy for the man, and the conversation did its job. He was led upstairs, the grip on him having loosened ever so slightly. Turning into the next corridor, into an area unknown to him, the slug let his hostage know. I almost feel sorry for the room for having such an unworthy guest, but I assume it lost its honor as soon as the first girl was locked in it, after the once imprisoned King Arthur III, while rebels occupied the castle. What a jump! From a king to a refugee girl to a corpse, and then a sickly kitchen boy with no manners. The advisor stopped before the door and began fiddling around with a ring of keys. Dew stared at his fat neck. He He felt his own arms as good as free, and it was in the action of the key wanting to find its way to the lock that it fell to the ground with a clatter together with the sound of a suffocating wet gasp. Duke's hands were still grabbing the hilt of the sword tightly after having thrust it into the thick rolls of flesh, a warm and dark gravy running along the sharp point of the blade and onto Duke's own flesh. He pulled it out. The body collapsed onto the floor. It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough seeing a fountain of blood erupt from the neck of the slug as he choked from it running into his airways. It wasn't enough for Dew to stare down with hatred while the cold eyes of the man under him desperately searched for a soul to help. He would die shortly, and mostly painlessly. Dew craved to sink the blade into those eyes and the mouth which was the source of so many unpleasant and annoying noises. But he didn't. He knew what he had to prioritize. His hand closed around them. He kept them in his fist. Nobody could take them, not even after his body was thrown to the ground with his head facing the cold stone and his arms twisted painfully behind his back after the sword had been taken from him. And he didn't try to escape. There was silence when the guards held him down, and there was silence when the door was opened and he was dragged to his feet to be pushed inside. Behind the door was a short space before another wall which consisted of wood instead of rock blocked the way. Dew saw colorful carpets under his shoes which were spotted with blood. On the left side there was a closet fitting neatly into the 1 meter space between the walls. On the right was a commode with a tablecloth on top. He could see delicate engravings in the wood, flowers, swirls, plants. It was not the first time he had seen it, but he couldn't recognize where he knew it from. The door opened and he was shoved inside. Then he was alone. He could see the cathedral with its high arched windows, but the inside was hidden by the reflection of bright grey light. The wall of trees behind it were lean, but the flowers bloomed in the mud. They opened the window, which opened to the inside, and reached out his hand, forcing it out in between the vertical bars. The outside was freezing compared to the warm inside. He stood on a thick carpet which covered the entire floor of the room. Cold air entered and Dew shut the window once again, having learned that there was no exit through it. He spotted his shoes where he had left them, beside a locked door in the wooden wall. There was no use of trying to force it open. He couldn't dig himself through stone. Sitting on the table, standing in front of the window and having his feet located on the chair, he stared around his new home. A square shaft was to his left, from which he knew most of the warmth came from. Next to it stood a small closet in which all of his important belongings had been put about an hour after he was imprisoned. A bed reminding him of that of Alba, but less glamorous, stood in the center on the right. A blanket and pillow laid on the floor underneath it. The sheet on top of the mattress showed many stains of red, both dripped and smeared. The upper left part looked as if it had been soaked through in the vague shapes of palms. They were the only traces, together with the scrap of wood of the bed frame due to the chains being once attached to it, hinting at what happened here. The longer he looked at it, the more nauseous he felt. On the right side of the bed, the door was leading to a small space with hygienic furnishing. If it wasn't for his situation, Dew would have seen living in this area as a luxury. The door had been opened once, he assumed it was midday, and brought him his usual bowl of food, with the same content always. He didn't eat. He even considered starving himself for a moment, but there was no way he could actually go through with his plan. During the afternoon he got up from his position on the table and pulled off the sheets. It was as he had guessed, but the blood had already dried. He didn't even want to know if there were methods of torture involved, or if it was from the past battle, or injury inflicted on him by himself. He spread the blanket across the bed, but only curled up on the other right edge to lean against the wall and the support prop of the cloth stretching over everything. The bowl stood untouched on the table. After getting tired of looking around the room, he viewed his finger, or rather what was left of it. The bandage was soaked through, so he took it off and used the one which was supposed to hide his neck to redo it. Of course it hurt, but it was easy to ignore through all of the chaos of events happening all at once. And he still didn't know where Avery was, how he was doing, and what was going to happen to him. His own fate was easy enough to figure out. He would stay in his room as long as they needed to control the hybrid. If the knight misbehaved, they would inflict punishment on their hostage, depending on the severity of the act. And Duke's partner would die, slowly but surely, and if he was gone there was no reason to keep Duke alive. Apparently he had been proclaimed dead already. The only step left was to execute him in secret. He disliked the idea, but couldn't decide whether it was better this way or the situation in which Avery had actually taken his last breath, which could enable Jonah to take his goal and go for Duke's throat. Perhaps the Boer had already given up on taking the Merling under his control, and all that was left was to hunt him down and end him for personal satisfaction. Duke saw that kind of person in Jonah. Both scenarios were unsettling. What he really wished for was for Jonah to die of something ridiculous, so Duke could take his partner and simply leave this place for good. He didn't even care all that much that Avery would die. At least he would be outside of this torture chamber and maybe be able to see his brother one last time. Those years of suffering wouldn't be for nothing. Duke could dig him a proper grave and either lay down beside him or start a simple life nearby. It wouldn't be the best possible outcome, but it would be fine. It would be enough. His fist, which he hadn't opened since getting locked up, loosened and revealed the 2 rings to him. They had suffered from the sweat and heat of his palm, but in general they were in good condition except for the blood on one. He took it in between his right thumb and index. Wiping it on his shirt, the cat was revealed under the blood. His ring finger was gone, and he didn't want it to be on the other hand, so he placed it on his middle finger. It was easier than expected. His lack of appetite must have done a good job for once. Taking the second ring into his view, he searched for another symbol. Logically, the size of the ring was slightly bigger than that of his, but not much. He looked at the surface. It showed greater signs of use, more dents and carvings as proof of frequent trauma, but it was stable. As he saw the motif on the inside, he smiled bitterly. He found himself mildly surprised. In his mind, it was supposed to be a fish, a trout maybe. That's what he was to most, a mindless water creature which instinctively acted without much consideration. Avery saw him a little differently. His thumb traced the precise lines of a fox.